us is BS, and it's got to stop.
See, it's going back to earlier when you said that you don't care if people call you a misogynist. I know exactly where you're coming from. I have a video recently called "I'm Proud to Be an Incel," and it's not that I'm an incel or a misogynist, but it's like just by talking about equal rights for men, talking about fathers' rights, saying that you don't think baby boys should be mutilated at birth, saying you don't think men should be conscripted in the military, saying you think male victims of domestic violence should be taken seriously. People will label you a misogynist just for saying that. And what you're saying now, the misandry that we're seeing in society is targeted towards men who are just saying basic things, like basic equality, like saying we think men should be fathers. We think that men should be equal in a relationship. And we get criticized for that. I mean, we get lambasted for that. So who's really fighting for equality? Hello and welcome to another episode of Faces of the MRM. I have a really exciting guest today, Mr. Jack Kammer. You are a legend in the men's rights community. You have been working for many, many years. You've been on radio. You are a published author. I mean, you've been doing this for a very, very long time. But you got your starts. We talked about this briefly, 1983. College radio in Towson. Is that correct?
Yes. Should I talk about that?
Sure.
So the way it worked was, this is a little bit of a story. You got a couple minutes for me to explain how I got into this radio show?
As much time as you want.
So I was playing on a co-ed softball team in 1982. Actually, the idea started in 82. I was playing on a co-ed softball team. And we played on Tuesday nights. And after our games on Tuesday nights, we'd go to a local bar and restaurant and eat and drink and dance and have a great time. 2 weeks consecutively, this happened to me. I was sitting at a table when one of my female teammates came over and wanted to talk with me about her boyfriend. And she told me, this happened twice.
Oh, no.
Both of them told me a tale of woe. I don't even remember the tale of woe. It was nothing earth-shattering. And both of them ended their tales of woe with some variant of, and so he's a real jerk, don't you think? And I said, well, he's a jerk, but based on what you're telling me, maybe from his point of view, it looks like this. And I offered each time, 2 times, an alternative perspective of what was going on between the man and the woman. And both times, the women said, oh my God, I never thought of that. And so I got the idea that this is a problem, that maybe the male perspective is just not very well understood. And maybe that would be fun for me to take on. So my girlfriend was on this co-ed softball team too. She was not one of the 2 who was talking about what a jerk her boyfriend was. I talked to her about maybe starting a magazine. I was going to call it Every Man Magazine. She said, printing's pretty expensive and postage is expensive. This was back in 83 before, email was a thing, or maybe email was just beginning to be a thing. A lot of expense in starting a magazine. And I said, yeah, that's true. And I think she's the one who said, why don't you try a radio show? So Towson University had a college radio station. They were an affiliate of NPR. I think they played the hourly news on their station, the hourly NPR news on their station. And I asked the program manager, I said, you guys have a have a public affairs block in the evening. Do you have any openings? I'd like to do a show on what's really going on with men, what's going on between men and women. He said, give me a demo. And I gave him a demo. He said, yeah, let's do this. And so I did it from 83 to 89 with a few breaks in there. And it became the most popular public affairs show on WCVT is what it was then. It's now WTMD. It's a very cool station. It's very, very into what's happening now musically around the world, but especially in Baltimore. So it became the most popular show, the public affairs show, and I was getting some listenership. I mean, I was a telephone call-in show, and people were calling, and I thought after 1988, 89, I thought, yeah, maybe I could take this thing commercial because I was paying for the whole thing myself. It didn't cost a lot, but it cost some money for long distance phone calls, for the little bit of postage I had to pay for sending out postcards. That's what I had to do, no emails, to people I knew were interested. Took it to a commercial station in Baltimore, a commercial talk radio station, got an audience with the president of the station. He said, yeah, this is good. And he told the program director, to give me a listen. Well, the program director and I met. I'm pretty sure I met with him. Might have been the sales director. I'm not sure. This is like 1989. But the idea was nixed. I was not taken on to this commercial station because it was either the program director or the advertising manager or both who said, we can't take the show because no advertisers will buy it. And why won't they buy it? Because they're afraid it will make women mad. And that was like the first instance of women's non-power, supposedly powerlessness, showing how powerful it was. Just the apprehension that men might speak a version of the truth that A, contravenes what women tell us is the truth about what goes on between men and women, and B, is something they don't want to think about because, powerlessness of women is really their power. There's a fellow named Lawrence Diggs who said a great line. He said, women's greatest strength is their facade of weakness. Men's greatest weakness is our facade of strength.
Yeah.
So, you take away women's
And just to be
facade of
clear,
weakness.
just to be
Go ahead.
clear, you weren't saying anything offensive or misogynistic on your show. So when you were talking about what happens between men and women in relationships, you weren't, saying like male supremacy, or you weren't saying that women were inferior or anything like that. But it was still seen as, oh, this could be seen as offensive.
The biggest cause of misogyny, in my view, is the overuse of the word misogyny. I'm sure there were women who thought I was misogynistic, because if you weren't 100% full-fledged card-carrying, flag-waving feminist, then you were a woman hater. How could you be anything but if you didn't support feminism as we have dictated it? So I'm not saying I wasn't a misogynist. I'm saying what we need to do is examine what this freaking definition of misogyny is. If misogyny is not trusting women, then we need to think about how much can you trust somebody who says they have no power, but has tons of power? How much can you trust somebody who is holding a club behind their back that could beat you silly, could kill you? And they say, club? I don't have any club. How much could you trust a person like that? You couldn't trust them at all. If women want men to lower the level of misogyny in the culture, it would be a good idea for them to be more honest about the power that they have. But it's much easier to say, no, we're keeping all our power, because nobody gives up power willingly, including us wonderful feminists. Now, we're not going to give up anything. What we're going to do is beat you up for daring to say anything that we don't want to hear. That's what it's like for me. That's why I don't run from the term misogyny. I don't care. You know, if you care about what women say, we're not going to get anywhere. It's almost like I have to sort of think of them as like flat Earth society people. You know, if somebody insisted that the Earth was flat, you wouldn't really get into a long argument, and you wouldn't get upset, and you wouldn't put a lot of energy into it. And you wouldn't really care about trying to convince them. You would just say, these people are not very smart. They're not very thoughtful. They're not very introspective. They're not very interested in knowing what's really going on. They're interested more in just pronouncing this ideology that really makes very little sense. So, yeah, I don't mind being called a misogynist, but let's look at the definition of misogyny. To be a misogynist these days, all you got to do is say, yeah, feminism doesn't have everything right. Feminism is absolutely wrong about some things. And, you know, if we really want to have, you know, an opportunity to achieve equal rights between the sexes, balance between the sexes, then we really need to look at why it is in this day and age when everybody talks about listening and really being respectful of everybody's point of view and engaging your stakeholders in the discussions and the decision making, because after all, diversity is about having multiple points of view. Well, then how can it be in this day and age when all of that is supposed to be a chief value of our progressive society? How can it be that men were never, ever invited to sit down and talk about what we would like equal rights between the sexes to look at? And I think the way it worked was that Betty Friedan wrote the book, The Feminine Mystique, in 1963. And it was a great book. I read it and I was amazed at how good it was. She was not anti-male. She was, in fact, actually sympathetic to men in many ways. But she talked about how it was important for the growth of the women's movement not to say anything that jeopardized women's primary source of power, which for many women, many traditional women, is they get to be the mother, they get to be the boss of the household, they get to run things around the house, they get to be CEOs of little tiny corporations, but CEOs nonetheless. And they're not really interested in sharing that C-suite, that CEO office, with some man, even if he is the father of their children. And so it became necessary to not invite men into a negotiation and a discussion and a listening session of, you know, what kind of a deal can we work out here? Here are some things that we as women would like more of. Is there anything you would like more of? Is there anything we have that you would like us to share with you? That didn't happen. What happened was the pronouncement of the oppressor-oppressed model. Women have no power. Men have all the power. And so it became ipso facto illegitimate for men to suggest anything about what we might want. And the response was, oh, yeah, that's a backlash against women, when really it's a front lash to try to really get some balance between the sexes. That's what I think.
I mean, it's not a
is
backlash to
going
say,
on.
I mean, it's not really a backlash to say, well, how about the men's perspective? And a way that's
It's
often
not.
attacked, feminists say, oh, that's a whataboutism. But I always say,
Yes,
well, yeah, what's wrong with whataboutism? What's wrong with saying, well, what
yes,
about these people too? If women were
yes,
being excluded, feminists would say, well, what about these women? And that would be a fair
yes,
point to make. So it's a
yes,
perfectly valid point to say, well,
yes.
what about this half of the this half of the population? I mean, what about this half of the population? So
Right. Right. But I mean, that would be perfectly sensible, right? And there are good, real feminists who are still trying to make that happen. But mainstream feminism, the dominant strain of feminism now, the one that's funded by all of the philanthropies that see feminism as the cool new fashion and won't be ready to turn their backs on feminism for probably another 15 or 20 years after they see the lack of progress that feminism is making. Um, it's there are good women, but mainstream feminism is not healthy. And I don't call myself an anti-feminist. I call myself a counter-feminist because I say, yeah, okay, that's a good point. That's a good point. That's a good point. Um, and not yes, but yes, and good point. And you know what's related to that on the man side is such and such. There are all these interactions between how life is for men and how life is for women that they don't want to talk about, because if we talked about balance between men and women in a balanced way, it would be perfectly crystal clear that women have to give up some things. Nobody gives up power willingly, but what we need to keep reminding women is that nobody gives up power willingly, but smart people will share it.
Right.
Because if you have shared power between people who trust each other, respect each other, and consider each other partners, that becomes synergistic. But right now, mainstream feminism is all zero sum.
Right. They hate the idea of a men's rights movement even existing. And there's this very hypocritical position I see feminists take where on one hand they say, well, feminism isn't about helping men. Why don't you start your own movement and organize for yourself? And then we do that and we say, okay, here we are organizing for ourselves. Sorry about the construction outside. And then feminists say, oh no, the men's rights movement shouldn't even exist. It's like, hang on. On one hand, you said that it's up to us to organize and advocate for ourselves. But then when we do that, you criticize us for even existing. So what are we supposed to do? And then you say, well, feminism is for everyone, feminism is for men too. But then when we point out particular topics and particular issues that feminists ignore, then you go back to saying, well, feminism isn't about men. So they just talk in circles. I mean, it's
Yes, they
completely
do.
hypocritical.
Yes, they do. And they you talk to them and they want to ignore our issues. And so that's why I talk to them as little as I need to, because their strategy is not to engage with us. Their strategy is to recognize that as men, we're committed to this idea of fairness and honor. And we respect women, and we want women to love us. We want to love women. We want there to be balance. We want life to be better. But their strategy to keep everything they've got, give up nothing, their strategy is not to have an honest discussion. Their strategy is to waste our time and our energy and what little money we have, which is very little, because the philanthropies are still in bed with, the wonderful feminist movement. And so, rather than try to get their approval, which we're never going to get, mainly because there's so much money from the philanthropies that are paying salaries to women whose job is to allow nothing on our side of the equation. Even, pick an issue on which women have achieved virtual equality, if not superiority. The rhetoric from the professional feminists is there's still much more to do, so that they have a justification for their fundraisers and for their grant proposals to the philanthropies, and the philanthropies keep coughing it up. So rather than waste our time talking to them about what they want to talk about, we need to assert our agenda. And, I'd like to talk with you about that if I can.
Please.
Okay, so lawyers talk about the theory of the case. And you've even seen the phrase in the current Trump trials. You know, what's the theory of the prosecution? What's the theory of the defense? The theory of the case is not every detail of the argument. It's not every statistic. It's not every graph. It is a broad presentation of your version of reality in a way that you hope will resonate at a very gut level with the jury, in such a way as the jury says, yeah, I can see that. That makes a lot of sense to me, what they're saying. So I would like to talk with you about the theory of the case that I think would be helpful for us to present. Now, it's really exciting for me to be talking to you, Thomas. Did I hear you say, I think I heard you say in one of your videos that you were 19 10 years ago. Are you about 30?
I was 19 11 years ago. So yes, I
Yes.
am 30.
Okay, so you're 30. So you're much younger than I am. And is it true? No, tell me, how true or false is it that men in your generation who want to be fathers want to be fully equal, fully respected partners in parenting with the mothers of their kids?
I'd say very true. 100%
Okay.
true.
Okay, so good. So here's the theory of the case. And I'm glad it applies to the younger generation, because I know it applies to the older generation. And it applies to the older generation who started at least a segment of the men's movement uh, in the divorced fathers movement, fathers' rights movement. And, you know, these guys are really, they're still around. They're getting more sophisticated in media presentations. But these fellows were really angry. And the reason they were angry is because they were hurt so freaking bad. And nobody wanted to listen to them. And they had no microphone. They had no social media. They had no internet. They had no blogs and podcasts. So those guys, those fathers' rights guys, were really torn up at seeing their kids just pulled away from them. You know, guys who hadn't seen their kids in 7 years and who were basically being laughed at by their exes. So my experience with seeing how key fatherhood was, even to these supposedly angry guys, they were angry because they were hurt. They were crying. Seeing the emotions, the love these men had for their kids 30, 40 years ago. It does not surprise me that your generation feels the same way about your interest in being full parents to your children. But the theory of the case is that a lot of women say they want equal husbands, equal parents, equal fathers. Well, of course I want my husband to be at home with the kids and helping me with the kids. Notice the word helping, not parenting on his own, but helping. They will often talk about, oh, well, what man wants to be taking care of stinky diapers? You know, as if stinky diapers is what having children is all about. That goes very much to the idea of women saying, we've got nothing to offer you. Raising kids is just, oh, it's just the drudgery. It's just stinky diapers. Well, men aren't falling for that anymore. And so the theory of the case is that for all of their talk about equal rights between the sexes, where it breaks down very heavily is in the idea of equality of parenting. So yes, there are a lot of women who want men to be more involved at home, but the real test for how sincere that idea of equality is what happens if the relationship breaks up? If you and I get a divorce, talking to my wife, if you and I get a divorce, how do I know that my investment in our children is going to be respected and protected as much as your investment in our children? And the answer is men can't know that. They can't know that, and women don't want to make it so that men can feel secure and have absolute certainty that absent some horrible thing that demonstrates he's not a good father, he gets to continue being a father whether she wants him to be or not. I mean, bad things can happen to good men. The wife could just come home one day and say, I just don't love you anymore. Or she falls in love with the tennis instructor. Or, maybe he has a stupid fling with somebody else and he screwed up his marriage. But no matter what, the man knows, and if he doesn't know, he should know, that his investment in his kids is not nearly as protected as women's, which makes it much more likely that men are going to get involved in a vicious cycle of not being as invested in their kids because they're afraid that she could walk out with them anytime. And if he does spend a lot of time at home rather than making money, and the divorce happens, he's lost his kids and he's lost a lot of his earning potential because he's passed up promotions at work or he's passed up travel at work to be a good father at home with his kids. He makes a huge investment that isn't protected. And the theory of the case is that all of this misandry we see, all of this misandry about men being sex crazed and violent and mean and cruel, and they can't multitask, and they're clueless, and all of this misandry, I believe, is finely tuned to create in the culture the very strong stereotype that men are not really suited to be good parents. Now, this is very much similar to what happened to women 40, 50 years ago. Men weren't crazy about women getting big corporate jobs and being in law school and becoming doctors and being scientists, because men thought, wow, well, first of all, that would be competition for me to get the promotion. And secondly, all of these things, making money is what makes me a man. And so the idea of women being equal to us in our traditional sphere was pretty threatening to men. And so we had lots of stereotypes. Women cry too much. They're not good leaders. They just want to file their nails and eat bonbons and go shopping, and they can't make tough decisions, and all of this nonsense that the women's movement did a very good job of sticking our nose in and saying, this is BS and it's got to stop. The theory of our case is that all of this misandry that you're spinning about us is BS and it's got to stop.
See, it's going back to earlier when you said that you don't care if people call you a misogynist. I know exactly where you're coming from. I have a video recently called "I'm Proud to Be an Incel," and it's not that I'm an incel or a misogynist, but it's like just by talking about equal rights for men, talking about fathers' rights, saying that you don't think baby boys should be mutilated at birth, saying you don't think men should be conscripted in the military, saying, you think male victims of domestic violence should be taken seriously. People will label you a misogynist just for saying that. And what you're saying now, the misandry that we're seeing in society is targeted towards men who are just saying basic things, like basic equality, like saying we think men should be fathers. We think that men should be equal in a relationship. And we get criticized for that. I mean, we get lambasted for that. So who's really fighting for equality?
Sure. So they want to call us misogynist, and we say, well, the real problem in America today isn't misogyny. going undetected. It's misandry going undetected. And one of the keys to having a theory of the case is for the jury to know that if they side with you, there will be a social benefit. Justice will be served in some larger way than just you and me and this individual father. Justice will be served in a larger way. And the way that we can say in our theory of our case is that, there is no way that there is too much good parenting in America today.
Yeah.
There's no way. And we are the most progressive movement in America today, because what we want is to move forward to allow us to have access to what you have had primary domain over for 100 years. We want to be in there contributing to family life and the raising of children, just like you wanted to be in corporations and doing what you have done in making corporations different. We want to make parenting different. We want to apply a male style from male culture to parenting. Now, I'm not saying that there is an absolute bright line between the way fathers parent and the way mothers parent. But there are general differences in male culture and female culture. Women have brought female culture into corporations. And I think in a lot of ways, it's been not very helpful. In a lot of ways, it's been very helpful. Similarly, men could bring in very good influences into parenting. And in partnership with women that we trust and love, we can work out the optimization of
I always say
parenting.
I always say it's like this. It's not that there's absolute strict rules between men and women, but if you took 1 million men and 1 million women, or 1 million boys and 1 million girls of the same age, and you tracked them over 10 years, you would see certain trends, right? It wouldn't be like this is the absolute rule for men and this is the absolute rule for women, but it would be fathers in general tend to have this aspect, and mothers in general tend to have this aspect. And I hate to say this because, it does sound somewhat regressive, but I do think that we are still somewhat attuned with evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology. And for the most part, we did evolve with the male and female parent. It doesn't mean a same-sex couple can't be very good parents. It doesn't mean a single mother or a single father can't be very good parents. But it does mean that when you have such a negative stereotype around fatherhood and around men and around fathers' rights activists, you're only causing harm. And there's really no reason to be against the fathers' rights movement. People have this perception that, oh, fathers' rights are regressive and they're against single mothers, they're against same-sex couples, and none of that's true at all. All fathers' rights activists and men's rights activists are saying is, don't discriminate against men in court. Don't discriminate against a father who wants equal custody if he's a deserving parent. And to me, that sounds simple, and yet that's so controversial, and I just don't get why.
They don't want it. That's really what it gets down to. They don't want it. They want to be the mommy. They want to be the queen of the house. They want to be the CEO of the family. They want to be the ones who decide where we go on vacation. They want to be the ones who decide where we live. They want to be the ones who, when the child falls down in the backyard and scrapes his or her knee and comes running into the living room where both of them are sitting, they want to be the one that the child runs to. I've had women acknowledge when I propose to them that the child runs to daddy instead of to mommy. How does that make you feel? Honest women will say, ooh, that hurt. Now, it hurts not because they're bad, but because they're good. They want to love their kid. It's only bad when they don't want their kid to love the father just as much. They don't want to share this wonderful thing called parenting. As much as we fought for the crummy jobs that many of us had and have, jobs we don't even really like, jobs that are killing us, jobs where the boss is an idiot, jobs where it's competition all the time. Many jobs are great. Most jobs probably are not that great. So as much as we fought women to keep them out of our factory domain where we were making money, women are going to fight at least as hard for being the primary people to be living in this world of love and relationships and affection and nurturance and gentleness. And we want that. We deserve that. The kids deserve having it from us. And we just have to insist that we're going to get it. And the facts are on our side. The statistics clearly show that fathers are important. Now, it used to be that that was dismissed by social scientists saying, well, that's just because when there's a father around, there's more money. Well, no, that's been debunked and disproven. So, pretty soon, even the most squeaky, politically correct philanthropies are going to have to start saying, wow, all this feminist stuff is really not making the world better. And then we come along and say, we'll take a couple million for a project we'd like to run, or whatever it is. We'd like to have some money for our lobbyists to go to the state capitals and say, do you see what they're trying to do? Is this really in the interest of your citizenry to have less fatherhood in our most troubled neighborhoods? Is this really what we want? Can you not see the vilification of men up and down the hierarchy of social services? I have a master's in social work. The word diversity is every third word out of a social worker's mouth. Yeah, we're going to celebrate diversity and inclusion. Yeah, well, they don't say a single freaking word about the fact that 13% of social workers are male. And I would say a large proportion of those male social workers are feminist male social workers. They're completely bamboozled by the idea of the patriarchy and toxic masculinity, and we need to get men to change.
Yeah,
No
it's like
talk of
whenever you hear about, we have about a minute and 40 seconds left. I do the 40-minute Zooms because any more than that and people stop watching. I have statistics on YouTube that show viewership drops. But it's true. When you hear people talk about diversity, it never includes the male perspective. So it never includes male victims of domestic violence. It never includes boys failing at school, boys falling behind in education, men being more likely to be homeless, men being more likely to be unemployed, men being more likely to be in prison. It never includes the male perspective, which is half of the population, because it's assumed that the patriarchy is already built in and that the male perspective is already built in. But when you look at the reality of how men and fathers and boys are treated, that doesn't line up with the real world.
no, it doesn't. And
And I just
I
wanna
hope
I just wanna put up your website. Male Friendly Media is your website now. Is that correct? To
yeah,
make sure this is it. This
let's
is you?
see. I'm just seeing you and me. Oh, that's me.
Okay.
That's my website. Now there's a hyphen there between male and friendly in that headline, but the URL doesn't have a hyphen. It's just male friendly, one word.
Got it.
Malefriendlymedia.com.
Okay. Well, I gotta say, Jack, this was a fascinating conversation. I was really excited to do this, and I think this was extremely interesting and entertaining, and I think people are gonna really, really like it. So I gotta thank you very much.